Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And I am super excited to talk to, a friend or, a colleague of mine, Cat Rushton. And yeah, me and Cat met actually, I think the first time virtually we've ever met. Oh, we have met at Research Ed. But yeah, we
Recently,
met
yeah.
virtually on the Trustwide CPD network with Tracy Goodyear and Sam Gibbs. And from then, I have thought, wow, what an incredibly humble person, doing all these amazing things in her trust, and yet is not kind of openly screaming and shouting about it. And so I thought, I need to speak to her and find out a bit more about her story. So welcome to the podcast, Kat.
Thank you. And it is really, really lovely to be here. Yes, we've known each other quite some time as we've sort of circled in the kind of PD people kind of circles where we have all the conversations about what we find exciting and all that PD stuff. So it's really exciting to just kind of be here with you today and have a chat.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about what your role is then at the moment.
So my role is Director of Institute at ATT, and that encompasses a lot of things. So professional development is the kind of main arm of that, and focusing on teacher development, classroom practice, but we also have our own ITT, ECF and MPQ, which is also led by the Institute, and we do lots of other work as well. So I sort of coordinate the marketing, we're sort of dabbling in kind of digital innovation at the moment. Yes, there's lots of work. I run all the communities as well, so all of that kind of horizontal improvement that happens. Yes, there's a sort of significant amount that falls within kind of my remit.
Yeah. And that again already speaks to this kind of humility that I have noticed that, and it's quite common in that people in roles like yourself or myself are doing really wide ranging kind of, I guess, responsibilities. And for me, some of them were completely out of my kind of wheelhouse and skill set before they were given to me. What's your sort of background before that then?
Yeah, so before that, I'm a science teacher by trade. And spent kind of many years teaching science, second in science, like joint head of science, then head of science, and then kind of leading teaching and learning as a senior leader was my kind of pathway through. So probably quite a traditional kind of curriculum route, I would say, was my sort of pathway through the early
Okay.
part of my career.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, I'm not a scientist, although I joked the other day when I was doing some science observations that I did a sports science degree, but all the scientists in the room laughed when I said that. So, yeah, I'm not sure I can count myself as a scientist.
Oh, I think
However,
that's a bit mean. We'll let you be a
yeah, it's
scientist.
a bit
That's
mean, isn't
fine.
it? But
Yeah, there's
sort of,
a lot of
I,
science in sport. So yeah.
I challenged them to a 100-meter sprint afterwards, and that's what I'm
Yeah,
quite proud
exactly. That'll make you feel better.
of. But yeah, well, I have picked up a little bit of snobbery within scientists about which science you were trained in. So
Mm.
which one is yours?
Yeah, so I'm a biologist, but I had a sort of significant amount of kind of like microbiology and kind of statistics as part of that. So it was a kind of slightly
Okay.
kind of mixed, very varied degree. But yeah, there does seem to be a kind of like, physics, chemistry are the kind of considered to be the most challenging. I'm not sure. And I think as we kind of move forward with things like potentially like generative biology, as we move forward with kind of artificial intelligence, I think there's some real, I think people are taking biology as a very serious subject now, as opposed to when
Oh, I see.
previously it might have been considered to kind of be not as, I don't know, intellectually challenging maybe as chemistry and physics. But I would disagree. I think biology is very
Good, good,
exciting.
good. That's hilarious. So we'll have to watch the the DFE ITT bursaries as a judgment of whether biology is the new thing. All right. Well, let's get stuck into the podcast. And for those that are new to it, we have a series of kind of set activities that we work through that the guests choose ahead of time. And the first one is something that we call a fast friends question. And so these are a set of questions that the guests choose sort of three from that are aimed at creating connection between people as quickly as possible. And they get increasingly vulnerable. And yeah, hopefully we'll find some common ground. So the first one that Kat chose was, for what in your life do you feel most grateful? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I chose this one, and I think I'm going to go a little bit meta to start with, so apologies for that. But I think it was kind of discovering gratitude and discovering being really grateful. I think in the early part of my career, I definitely found myself on the hedonic treadmill. I think that is a natural human trait. I don't think you can kind of avoid it. I think we naturally aspire to the next thing, and we've always kind of got our eyes on the prize of maybe, professionally, kind of for me, what the next promotion was. Maybe personally, it was, kind of the next I don't know, addition to the family or the next kind of house or whatever those kind of career and personal aspirations that you have in your life. And we can tend to kind of always be looking to the horizon. What's the next thing? How do we get there? And I think we have to really work actually quite hard to like actively counteract that, and
Yeah.
really cognitively override our kind of need to always be focused on the next thing, and sort of never really living in the here and now. And I think sometimes it's really sad when you sort of miss your life because you're too
Yeah.
busy sort of like sprinting through and kind of grasping and kind of trying to get to the next thing. And I think it's, I think we return to baseline after our successes and after our victories and the things that we've achieved really, really quickly. Especially if you're sort of quite high functioning and quite hard working, you can kind of always be focused on that next thing. And I think it's really important not to. And I sort of remember sitting down with my sort of husband at one point, and I think it was just like like a normal Friday evening, and you've had some tea and the
Yeah.
kids are in bed and you're like watching a bit of telly, and I was like, this is actually it. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
actually get any better than this. Or like the kind of normal holidays that you go on, like in the UK, and you're in a caravan, and
Yeah.
you've got that sort of sunny evening, and it doesn't get any better than that. And I think sometimes we just have to pause, and really reflect on like this actually is it. Like maybe right now is the good times, and if I don't realize that, I could quite easily miss those. And I think it's like professionally as well. I think I didn't realize soon enough in my career, to acknowledge when I was in really golden times professionally. And there were a couple quite early on. Like I was a joint head of science at a school in Norfolk, quite early on in my career. And I just worked the other joint head of science, us together. It was just a dream team. It was where I really kind of evolved my way of working. That is to kind of sound off ideas, bounce things around, and then come up with a plan, kind of not from your own head, but working really collaboratively. I don't think I realised that was one of my golden times at the time, and possibly the first time I was head of science as well was one of those times that I wish I could go back and be grateful for that, because it was amazing. But I think more recently, perhaps, when I was an assistant principal, and I'd always dreamed of, leading teaching and learning. That was the dream. And I think by that point, I had realised that actually, this was the team came together. It was a brilliant SLT. We had the most, kind of robust conversations. We really made a difference for the school. And I think, kind of reflecting back now, I'm glad that I didn't miss that. At the
Yeah.
time, I knew it was an awesome team. I knew we were doing great things. And I actually, every day, was really grateful to kind of be part of that. I think actually right now as well is another time I'm really conscious that I really love my job right now, and I need to be kind of grateful for that and where I am in my life. So yeah, I think it's easy to blink and miss it. So like don't.
Yeah.
That's all I'm gonna say.
That is a cracking answer to that one, isn't it? And geez, so much of that stuff resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with lots of other leaders. That idea, as you said, of just constantly looking for the horizon, what's next, sort of never being satisfied. And I think you're right. There's something in there around personality, and like most things, there's probably useful, isn't it? That drive and that energy and that kind of ambition and all those are quite useful. But when it gets to the extreme, they become maybe destructive. And I suppose the takeaway for leaders is to stop and recognize whether you are currently in a sweet spot. Do you think there's probably more than one sweet spot? Hmm.
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
you probably do, don't you? Because it's probably not helpful to think, oh, the best days are over. You know, you probably have numerous ones. It's just about being realizing you're in one. Ah, that is
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely. And I
Right.
think even when you're not, there's a lot to be grateful for, isn't there? Even when you kind of
Yeah.
know you are in a tough time, there are still plenty of things to be kind of grateful for, even if they're the small things.
Yeah.
I just think those golden moments in your kind of life, either personally or professionally, when they happen, it would be a real shame to miss those. And I think,
Yeah.
you'll kind of look back in 20, 30 years time and kind of be like, oh, I wish I could go back to the good old days of this.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be a shame if we'd kind of missed them when we were there?
I think I've talked about this before once, but I had a job once when the financial climate was very different, where I was the leader of e-learning at my school. And basically all I did was just play around with tech, and like I was like the poster boy for Dell and Microsoft, and they would just send us loads and loads of tech just to play around with in the classrooms. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was that was a pretty sweet spot. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on then to your first ignition point. And again, if you're not familiar with that, the idea is that we ask our guests to describe moments or people or events from their lives that have shaped them in some sort of significant way. And so Kat's chosen this first one, which the title is Plan Pending. So tell us a bit about what it is and how it transformed you.
Yeah, so I think when I finished university, I sort of did my A levels and I absolutely loved the sciences and didn't really know what to do, so I went off to do a biology degree, and I focused really hard on that kind of biology degree, worked my way through it, and got to the end, and then kind of realised that actually I didn't have a plan. I came to the end of my degree and at that point really had no plan at all. I didn't have a plan for a job. I didn't have a plan for what I wanted to do, and I kind of moved back home with my parents, which is, a really miserable experience after you've had 3 fabulous years away at university and you kind of feel really grown up and mature, and then all of a sudden you're sort of back at home with your parents I mean, I live, my family live in a small town. It's not, it wasn't the vibrant life I was used to once I'd been at university, and I just couldn't get a job. Like I was sort of going through, this was back in the day where you had the sort of job articles in the newspaper, and I was kind of trawling those, just trying to find some work to kind of get some money together. And I'd sort of I'd go to job interviews and I wouldn't get them. I mean, there was one really like horrendous job interview where the button on the kind of lift up to the top floor where these people were kind of doing the interview wasn't working, and because I'd parked round the corner, they'd actually seen me coming, and then they'd realised that obviously that I couldn't get in, and had kind of came down and sort of brought me up and given me the job interview. But because of that, I was the only person out of the kind of 8 people that they'd got scheduled that they interviewed, and I still didn't get the job. Like, so so it was just it was a really kind of depressing sort of low point. And
Yeah.
I did eventually find, because I was sort of looking for work to kind of tide me over because I wanted to go traveling, but without these kind of
Right.
short-term posts to kind of get the money together, it kind of wasn't going to happen. So eventually I did find some kind of work that just meant that I could just put some money in the bank, live with my parents, didn't cost me much to live, so I could kind of put that money away, and kind of went off traveling. Having done my biology degree, I sort of traveled around South America, and we'd kind of found this sort of animal sort of sanctuary reserve that we sort of wanted to work in, me and my friend who were traveling, and we sort of rocked up and we were sort of super excited about it. And they were like, yeah, of course you can. It's this much money to volunteer. And we were like, okay, that's like all of the money that we've got for the whole rest of the like trout. Like we were like living on an absolute shoestring, we were,
Yeah.
we really were. So we sort of dithered about. We were like, well, we've come all this way to do this, and this was sort of before the time where you could find absolutely everything out on the internet. So we were a bit kind
Yeah.
of thrown for what to do next, really. And we just happened to be kind of hanging about in this town that had got this animal kind of sanctuary, and we kind of bumped into these people who were volunteering at like a school for local
Right.
children. They sort of ran this quite kind of bus round the local area, picked all these kids up, brought them to school. This is in Bolivia.
Okay.
Taught them some lessons, fed the children, because for some cases they weren't necessarily getting all of the nutrients and sort of nutrition they required at home, and kind of ran them back. They're like, no, you actually, this is volunteering. You sort of pay enough to kind of cover your food and your kind of like stay, but actually you're not paying additional money to sort of volunteer. So we could
Sure.
afford it. So we stayed, and we were there for a month, and we did lots of volunteering. And I it started off with cleaning the toilets and riding the bus to take the kids home and pick the kids up. And well, that was an experience and a half, sort of,
Yeah.
telling kids in Spanish to please sit down because they were all sort of jumping all over the place. It was quite an experience. But I also then kind of got roped into supporting in the classroom and helping. And that kind of made me think, you know what, actually, I quite like this kind of working with kids. I quite like this teaching
Yeah.
malarkey, even though I'm going to be honest, what I was doing there probably wasn't really teaching. It was more kind of just
No
colouring in
cognitive
work.
science going on.
Yeah, there was very little cognitive science around, and I certainly hadn't seen it at that point. So yeah, it definitely wasn't teaching, but it was kind of supporting in the classroom. And then I kind of came back to like home after I'd finished my travels, and sort of signed up for teacher training, really on a whim. I was, like a lot. I sort of got back, and then I got like a week to apply, and I was like, oh, I'll just chuck my application in. But obviously, sort of science
Yeah.
applicants were still being taken right up to the last minute, so kind of was offered a position. And I sort of went in because I'd been quite last minute, didn't really know what I kind of wanted to do. I sort of went into teacher training with quite a pragmatic approach.
Yeah, right.
I didn't have big dreams about how I was going to really quickly change kids' lives, or I hadn't carried this kind of like passion for teaching since I was really young. I just was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'll give it a go. And once
Yeah.
I started, I was like, oh my goodness, like I found my calling. Like I really, really love this. So I'd sort of gone from being completely lost and having no plan and just knowing that I really loved science and I'd really enjoyed studying science, to actually then having kind of a vocation that I sort of knew that I could kind of use those
So cool.
skills. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that is so cool. And there's that whole sliding doors thing, isn't there? Like, imagine if you could have afforded to do the initial volunteering.
yeah.
What was that volunteering to do?
Well, from what I gather, because we obviously were there for a month, so we bumped into the people volunteering there when we were kind of in the town and kind of whatever else. And
Yeah.
I think it was just cleaning up poo after animals. So I think I got the best deal anyway. I'm going to be completely honest. I think they got duped, and we won the volunteering lottery on that one.
Oh, absolutely. I love the fact that sometimes I feel like it's not socially acceptable to approach things pragmatically. You know,
Mm,
people don't want to hear that, do they? They want to hear, you know, I've wanted to do it forever, or it's a deep passion, and all those things. But I think it's probably an untruth. I think most people have probably got some sort of pragmatic approach, and I don't think there's anything. I think it's a strength, and certainly for leaders, if you're always leading with emotions, that's probably not a good thing. Um,
mm.
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think you can kind of get that sort of exposure as well, can't it? It can help you. So the exposure
Yeah,
can help you to realize what your kind of values are, because before that I hadn't
yeah.
really, other than being at school myself, hadn't had any exposure to it. So maybe that helped me kind
Did,
of,
did you
over
did you
time get
shine
my.
up did you shine up your answer for the initial teacher training interview? Like, yeah, well, fancy
Yeah,
it,
yeah, I
maybe.
tried it up a little bit. Yeah, yeah. Oh, it was. I mean, at the time, at that point, it really was very much like, oh, just give it a go. Like I enjoyed working
Yeah,
with kids when I was away, but I didn't, I wasn't kind of going into teaching with a
yeah.
really big
In a
vision of
strange
my
way,
kind of. Yeah.
I'd led our teacher training for like 7 years, and after like after however many years of interviewing people, I actually my ears pricked up, and I was more interested when people were more truthful. Like, yeah,
Mm,
I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy this, but I like kids and I love my subject, and
yeah.
that to me was more authentic than that sort of, oh, I've always wanted to be one since I was a small child. It's like, yeah, I heard all this before. Um,
Mm,
Something disingenuous about the status quo, and of course we know, don't we? If you speak to anybody about what they want in their leaders, it's authenticity.
mm,
So maybe there's some stuff in there. Okay,
yeah.
well, let's keep cracking on then. So again, the third element of the sort of Pick and Mix podcast is something linked to the book, so the Leadership Launchpad's book. And Kat has picked two that particularly resonated with her, and so I'll explain the first one, and then we'll ask Kat why it resonated. So let me just share the screen. So the first one that Kat's chosen, if you're watching this on video, you'll be able to see the graphics. If not, we will attach the image so you can see it afterwards. But the first one says, "Where do we stop?" And this was kind of came about because I work in a large trust now, and lots of people listening to this will work in organizations that are getting bigger. You may work in a small trust, or you may work in a small organization or a small school, um, but over time you may find yourself increasingly, increasing in size really. And so I started thinking about belonging, because when I wrote this, that was sort of the thing that people were talking a lot about. And I wrote this idea that kind of individuals typically experience varying levels of belonging across different levels of an organization. And it was fascinating to me that when I kind of listened to different people at different levels, there was a variability in how much they would say we and how much they would sort of distance and say they. And it happened, well, we'll go through it, shall we? So I started thinking about, I guess the lowest level would be group, so it's very common, isn't it, for people who are in a group to say we. But as you go sort of higher up, you get that sort of, the next level, I guess, would be team. So when we talk about the difference between a group and a team is something that's pulled together for a specific purpose, so probably more focused than a group of people. And that maybe increases in kind of the, we. But then you might get into a faculty if you work in an educational kind of setting where there are multiple departments. So you're getting, again, larger and larger. Then you get into school. And then if you work in a multi academy trust or, just a group of schools, you then got that top level. And it was interesting to me about how potentially the we gets weaker as you go higher up and bigger as an organization. And as leaders, we need to fight against that, I suppose. We have to work hard to make sure that everybody at every level, regardless of the size of the organization, is talking about we. And I guess some of the barriers I talked about, a little bit of kind of potentially there's a misaligned purpose, or the values get a bit blurred, or potentially some people feel discriminated against, which then affects their kind of levels of belonging. Um, I think if you don't purposely create opportunities for collaboration, then you kind of can't expect people to feel collaborative or part of something bigger than them, which naturally leads to limited connections. And also, that belonging stuff links to recognition, doesn't it? If you don't feel like what you're doing is being recognized and maybe rewarded, you tend to feel like a bit of an outsider and on the edge. And I guess the other ones would be support and agency and psychological safety and trust. And I then started thinking, well, wow, okay, well, if I'm a leader and I want to ensure or at least improve this feeling of we, what could I do? Um, and for me, there's something, and this was a new phrase to me. I wanted, in my mind, it was that idea of when you recruit people, how do you treat them? Do you treat them like human beings? Are you are you treating people at the recruitment stage already as a member of your community? Like, or are you waiting until they're actually selected? Because if you do that, potentially you might put them off from the very beginning. We've got kind of an immersive induction process. So, from my experience, where you do induction really well, you fast track that feeling of belonging. Um, and when it's done superficially, potentially you kind of sideline people. Um, the natural things are kind of counteracted to the barriers, I suppose. So making sure that the values and the goals are aligned, that there's open communication, that wherever you can in every system and process, you kind of take a coaching approach. So it's very much a dialogue, and there's reciprocity, and people feel like there's a sense of partnership. Even in things like performance management, that idea that I'm heard, I'm valued, that sort of thing. I think one of the things I've noticed, and I'm a bit guilty of this myself, is that I probably early in my career lost, when I was a teacher, or just a teacher, I knew my kids inside out. Not only their data, but I knew them as individuals and all kinds of, their hobbies, their interests, and all these sorts of things. And I think I lost a little bit of that when I stepped up into leadership. I think just I don't know if I saw the kind of crossover value, but as I went through my career, I realised that actually it's no different. You need to know your staff really well so that you can make that kind of connection. And then the last thing I wrote really was the natural things, like investing in them in terms of PD, making sure you praise and reward, creating a bit like we talked about before, opportunities for people to collaborate. Also, you need to create opportunities for people to interact socially. And I don't mean sort of outside of school or anything, but, are there opportunities where people can connect, not in terms of teaching and learning and, in education, or like know a little bit more about each other. Yeah, and the last one I wrote was just about making sure that you've got kind of social group norms, so things that people would attest to as, oh yeah, that's just what we do around here. So that was kind of what I was thinking when I wrote it. But why did it resonate with you, Kat?
I think it probably resonated with me because, like you, I'm also part of a large organisation, and I kind of sort of split myself across a large number of schools. And I think that kind of where does we stop has to be something that really, falls into my remit to kind of really counteract that. I think there
Yeah.
was kind of two parts to it I sort of wanted to hone into. I think, firstly, the kind of idea of, actually being a leader in that sort of organisation, and how you as an individual leader kind of act to overcome overcome the kind of us and them kind of trust and school kind of, approach, and what that looks like in your behaviour as a leader, but then also what you set up to kind of ensure that all colleagues and all, everyone in the organisation can kind of feel that we from the whole organisation, rather than a kind of us and them, whether that be kind of us in, we in this school and kind of them in the trust, or them in another school, or whatever it is, really kind of closing that gap and making yourself one organisation. So I mean, as an individual leader, I'm really lucky because I do feel that we are one organisation, but that comes from sitting across all of those schools and getting to interact with, everybody across the trust, sort of with varying degrees. But I think one of the things that I really reflect on is that kind of idea that one negative encounter can actually kind of undo multiple positive encounters with an individual. And that's so important when you're considering scale and considering the maybe irregular opportunities that you might have to be exposed to groups of or individual colleagues. So people in my schools probably think I'm a bit bonkers, because when I'm in, I'm like, morning to everyone. Like I sort of live in this fear that like one day I'm going to be slightly kind of like off my game, and I'm going to walk past someone and not acknowledge them, and they're going to think, oh my goodness, she's not very friendly. Because I just think it's it's so important, and because you don't get that exposure to colleagues on a really regular basis, you can't use that the mere exposure effect, where just familiarity kind of leads to liking. You don't get to experience that, so you have to be quite forthright with your kind of friendliness, and introducing really actively introducing yourself to someone. And for me, I am actually quite an introvert, really. I have to sort of consciously say to myself, so if I sit down at a table of leaders and I don't necessarily know all of them, I will go, oh, I haven't met everybody, and actually introduce myself and say hello. Or if I'm kind of walking through the school, I might sort of, stop in a classroom and maybe speak to the TA. But I always now actively kind of consciously say, introduce myself and say hello, because, not everybody is going to know who you are, and you certainly aren't going to know who everybody is, because by the time you sort of circle back around to another school again, things may have changed, or you might have just not met those colleagues before. So just really kind of proactively ensuring that I do that, and also really thinking about different methods of communication as well, to make sure that you as an individual are kind of being part of that one organisation. So not underestimating the importance of being quick to respond to emails where possible, and being friendly as part of those emails, because actually when you know someone face to face, their digital persona doesn't really mean too much to you. You sort of read over that. If somebody you're in the classroom next to sends you a short email, you pay no attention to the fact that that's a short email, because you know them. You just had a coffee with them. Like, they've sent you an email that says, blah, 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 but you're like, that's fine, because I literally know them. But if your only experience of someone, or the majority of your experience of someone, is actually digital, that digital presence has to represent you as a friendly person. So you have to be really kind of careful to make sure that you sort of always give off that kind of digital persona that's friendly and welcoming, and kind of makes you one of that sort of part of that larger organisation. The other bit really, and definitely the most important bit, is as a leader, kind of what structures and systems and other things we put in place to kind of make sure that all of those things that you listed are either counteracted if they're the negative things, or we're building those in for those kind of positive approaches. And we do a huge amount of that in my trust. We are very geographically spread as well. So the opportunity to get colleagues together in face-to-face groups is quite limited. So therefore we have to be a little bit kind of, we have to be a bit inventive about how we make those things work sometimes. And we've got these kind of hub rooms where we get people together, and we kind of like have small groups, and then they kind of are teams into a room with another group that are in another sort of geographical location, and you can kind of do that. But I read once that someone quoted this. I don't know who it is, but I'm gonna use it anyway. It's the idea that you can't scale relationships, but you can scale culture. And I think that's what we're trying to do, because actually we have a set of values, and we then put things in place to ensure that colleagues can experience those values. So things like our leadership coaching that we do, that gives them that kind of experience of the trust as the one organisation that maybe they wouldn't get if they weren't kind of getting coaching, or our communities where we get groups of colleagues together, and that's all kind of very regular, ingrained as part of our organisational culture, where you meet other leaders who might have a similar domain to you, so you get to share all of those ideas. And also all of our kind of professional development opportunities really kind of bring together people so that they can experience that together and feel part of a larger organisation. Yeah, and our
Yeah.
PD days do the same. And anything that we can do to make those connections between the schools so that they feel as part of one organisation.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, there's a couple of things in there that really are, I think, are gold. That first one about makes me think about, like that Brene Brown kind of marbles in the jar analogy.
Mm,
That you've kind
yeah.
of got a jar with everybody, and when you have a positive interaction, you put marbles in, and when there's a negative, it takes marbles out, and that kind of relative, I guess, credit has
Yeah.
something to do with the relationship and the way that they interact with you. And I love the idea, and I definitely feel this, that because we're talking about growing organizations, you're right, aren't you? That as the organization grows, naturally you have less interactions with specific individuals, or they're more
Mm,
spaced out over time. And that should be a bit of an alarm bell or a wake up call to leaders to know that if you've got less interactions, then each interaction suddenly holds more value.
mm,
Um, and I think you're right. There's definitely something. There's a personal anecdote, really, that my son just started year seven, and he's just getting into this reward points situation, and sadly, I don't apologise for this really, but we're just going to incentivise it with money. Um, it's going to say pay him to get lots of positive points, and then that's kind of make it. We say, well, it's a pound if you get a positive point, but it's £2 off if you get a negative point. So
mm,
negatives are twice as unhelpful as a positive. But that kind of speaks to your idea, doesn't it, about how
mm.
if you make a negative one, it can erase a lot of the positive stuff that you put in before.
Yeah, we
Um,
really, I
and
mean,
then
humans are really prone, aren't they, to negativity
really,
bias? So,
yeah,
yeah.
and it can be quite subtle as well.
Mm,
You know, it doesn't have to be a demonstrable withdrawal. It doesn't have to be a massive withdrawal. I mean, one that comes to mind this week is that I observed some colleagues in one of our schools at the beginning of the week who I'd never met before, and I guess because I'm old and I know what I'm doing, I made sure. I need really short little drop-ins. I did about 12. I made sure that I emailed them afterwards to say thank you and to give them a bright spot. But that could easily have been something I didn't find time to do. You know, and that would have been maybe not a negative. They might have expected it, but it certainly was a positive. Then receiving, I had lots of emails back saying, "Thanks ever so much. I really appreciate it. Any time you want to pop in again, please do." And I remember thinking, I did it purposefully, but also I was pleased that I did it.
mm,
I mean, the other thing that I think you mentioned, which resonates with me, is that if when we talk about those things, we agree that they are truth, that we gets weaker as you get larger, then you're right. Let's put systems in place to kind of mitigate that. If we know it's a problem, then let's create some systems so that it doesn't become as big a problem, but also that we approach it systematically so that we don't rely on individuals to inconsistency. So that's a good little message to I guess to leaders listening to this is what systems have you got in place currently that would maintain the we-ness of your organization, and if you haven't got lots of things, what could you put in place?
mm.
Okay, let's move on. I think I've just made up a word, which, as I said, I thought, did I really just say we-ness?
The weakness.
I hope that doesn't become a thing. Yeah. Anyway, so let's move on to your second. Your second fast friends question. So this one's fascinating. So you chose if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know? Tell us
Okay,
about
so I went for the future. Absolutely not. Thank you very much. Like
that.
I
Yeah,
think
you don't want to know.
nobody wants to know that, do they? I mean, it is much better not to know. You can kind of end up in some sort of like, film kind of plot kind of loop, can't you, and all sorts of nonsense. So definitely wouldn't want to go there. However, sort of myself and my life, I think, yeah, actually I would choose to see it. Like I think if I'm really, I think superpower that I would have would be like self-awareness. I think it's a real superpower, and I don't think nobody's self-aware, are they? We're all on a scale. Some
Yeah.
people are a bit more self-aware than others, but nobody's really self-aware, no matter how much you sort of try to do that. And I think sometimes when we try to reflect, what we end up ruminating on actually isn't the thing, and the
Yeah.
things that kind of, people do notice and maybe people do go away offended by, maybe you didn't even notice. I think
Yeah.
sometimes your kind of perception of situations can actually be quite off, and sometimes we end up ruminating over things that really no one noticed but didn't actually sort of clock the thing that was important and that we did do. And this kind of made me think, the idea of the imagined school that kind of Professor Becky Allen's spoken about, and I think we
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
all have like an imagined life actually, and an
Yeah.
imagined version of ourselves, and that's kind of based on the mental models of like how we perceive our kind of environment and our interactions and all of those things. And I think, if I could have a crystal ball that could help me, only when I choose to, I don't think I want to know all the time. I think sometimes I'd be like, no thanks, but like some of the time it would be nice to be able to kind of make my mental model of my kind of imagined life closer to the actual reality, so I could reflect on it more effectively.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it? And I think again, you're on the money around kind of self awareness, and you can't. I remember writing something once that you can't change what you don't acknowledge,
Mm,
and that acknowledgement starts with awareness and then acceptance, and that feels true, doesn't it? Like if you don't even know that you come across as aggressive in certain situations, or whatever it is that you're not aware of, is that kind of Johari window? Have you seen that tool?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
fascinating and scary at the same time.
terrifying.
Terrifying. It also makes me think, and those that listen to the podcast before will know that I'm, and it sounds like you are as well, Kat, a big fan of coaching. Um, I think my development as a leader took a real step up when I started being offered coaching, um, and just that idea of being having someone else making me more aware of things is really important, isn't it? Um, Yeah, so there we go. I guess the shout out or the takeaway for leaders would be around maybe self-assessing how aware you are. Maybe have a go at one of those Johari windows, and if you haven't got access to a coach, then shout at somebody to try and get hold of
Mm,
one because again, quite painful, but um, that's part of it, isn't it? There's a bit of pain at the beginning, but long-term gain.
mm,
Okay, so let's talk about your second ignition point. So this one you wrote down is called Beyond the Familiar. Tell us about
mm.
that.
I think this is probably my first ignition point was my kind of starting my career, and then this is kind of the point where it kind of gear changed. I think is what I would say, and I think prior to this point I'd worked in quite a kind of limited context. My experience was quite limited. I worked in different schools, but all kind of sort of rural Norfolk area, so kind of quite similar in their context really, and I think although I did have kind of confidence in my own ability and kind of what I was doing, I was sort of working in, leadership. However, my kind of confidence to kind of maybe challenge and maybe kind of stand by my own opinion probably wasn't really there yet. I think I probably was still kind of, quite quick to acknowledge somebody else's expertise and say, okay, well, if you say that, I agree, and sort of kind of nod along. And I'd sort of worked in the same sort of local trust and a sort of handful of schools that sort of in a really similar area for quite some time. And then a job came up that was like a regional role for science, and it kind of sort of spanned, all the way down kind of to Suffolk and then into kind of Thurrock and that kind of area, and would really kind of take me out of my comfort zone. So I applied for that job and kind of got it, and that role took me all over the place supporting science departments, which obviously was my kind of area of expertise, being an ex-head of science. And I think what changed was I realised that I could actually walk into a school and quite quickly build relationships with people in school, figure things out, help them, kind of have a bit of a coaching approach and actively listen, and really kind of quite quickly get into a new context and adapt. I sort of found my adaptability. I was like, oh, okay, I really can adapt to these different situations, and I learned so much just from doing that. And I think I also learned that some things are out of my control. I think I
Right.
quite quickly realised that I could go in and help with some things and not others, and to kind of like really focus on what were the things that I could change, and really thinking about kind of spheres of influence, and how I could have impact in a way that was really positive without kind of wasting my time or redirecting my energy far too much in things that kind of shouldn't. And I think that that move kind of moved me from being quite a introverted person to somebody who could turn on the extroverted. And I think
Yeah.
this is where my kind of ability, me sort of going into school saying hi to everyone, the second I'm there, and all of that kind of stuff, I think came from, because I sort of, as part of that role, I really quickly realized that you have to get in and you have to be active really quite quickly. And it really built my confidence in terms of my own ability to adapt to new contexts. And obviously, the kind of rest is history, really, because obviously I work across a number of schools now, and I regularly find myself in a situation with a load of leaders that I don't know yet, and have to adapt to that situation or a new challenge that I haven't seen yet. And I kind of have that confidence to know that I will get stuck in, and I will do the best that I can, and to kind of have confidence in my own ability to adapt to new situations.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that feels like a really important message for kind of emerging leaders or people that are, early in their leadership journey. That idea that if you are passive about your career development, you'll probably stay within the
Mm,
guardrails. If you just allow the world to present opportunities, then you'll probably, yeah, you won't look outside. And if if you're feeling like an imposter, or you haven't got the confidence and things that have to stretch out, I mean, did you take any proactive steps once you started, when you knew you were going to step outside of your comfort zone? Were any proactive things to try and shrink that feeling?
mm. Yeah, I think I sort of realised there was a point that I sort of thought, actually, I need to move on now. I need to do something. I need a new challenge, and I kind of realised that point. And um, I think my proactive step was to begin to look for what that would be. And I think
Right.
that was kind of where that started. I think sort of seeking for what that would be. But I think kind of later on it grew more, because there was the point where kind of COVID happened. This was later. And actually the school I was working in at the time, we were then kind of picking up, oh, how do we teach over, Teams? How do we do this? And I was like, do you
Yeah.
know what? I'm going to go and teach myself Teams, and I'm going to train all of the staff over Teams, how to use Teams to teach kids, And I
Nice.
was there with, like, well, I can't demo that bit because I've got to screenshot it, because I can't actually do that whilst I'm in a meeting and all of this kind of stuff. I was like, yeah, do you know what? I can learn that. And, I sort of went through a stage where I did quite a lot of blogging as well. And I sort of put those first few blogs out with a kind of, oh, I don't know whether anyone's going to read these. And, at the time it was sort of back a few years ago now, but they got a bit of traction. And I think just, it is just that kind of give it a go, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just sort of actually have a go. And really, there isn't a lot of worse that can happen if you are
No.
doing your best and giving it a go.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I suppose it's a shameless plug, but the sort of the other book that I've written is aligned with my kind of doctorate, which was in leadership confidence, actually, which is obviously freakishly aligned with this. And in the book, we talk about, or I talk about, this thing called a self-efficacy dip. So these kind of natural dips in confidence that happen when any change occurs, but they certainly happen when you change role within kind of
Mm,
your career. But there's some comfort in knowing that they're normal and they're escapable, if that's a word.
mm,
So the fact of, that yes, you are going to take a dip in your confidence and your expertise to begin with a new role, but that through proactive kind of self study and professional development and even coaching, I suppose, you can escape that dip.
mm,
Is something just to hold on to, I suppose. And certainly, if you are not taking opportunities because of a perceived lack of confidence, then yeah, I mean, I think if you listen to any established leader, they will all say, yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I changed
mm.
role and I was scared, and yeah, there was a dip, and you know what, I got through it though. Um, Amazing. All right. Well, let's move on to your second launchpad. So this one uh, is called "Holding Things Lightly," and it it's broadly linked to yeah, building relationships with people, building psychological safety, but also kind of, I guess, proactively opening the door for other people. So when I wrote it, the first thoughts were this idea of leaders that lead with kind of a level of tentativeness. Um, it's a key approach for them because if they want to build psychological safety, and when we mean psychological safety, for those who aren't familiar with the term, we mean kind of comfort being vulnerable, but also if you're trying to build open communication, then actually this idea of holding things lightly can be useful. And so when I started thinking about it, I was thinking, what things would a leader need to hold with an open hand? And so, I mean, not have a fixed grip on stuff. The first one being our ideas. I think we've mentioned it before, this Trustwide CPD Leaders Network that we're both a part of. And that idea that if you've got expertise in an area, you still need to kind of hold those ideas quite loosely because knowledge is very kind of, I guess, temporary, isn't it? It's continually being constructed. And so just because you've got an idea, you shouldn't allow yourself to be too fixed on that. Control is a natural thing. I think as leaders, varying levels of comfort with control. Some people want complete control. Some people are happy releasing some control. But I would imagine most of the evidence and most of the experience from leaders is that it's not helpful to hold too much control. Certainly, if you want to build teams and build kind of other people up. I think this is a message that I take quite heavily: is that we shouldn't hold our failures too tightly either. Somebody mentioned it the other day to me, this idea of short-term parking. Like if you failed in something, yeah, think about it, hold on to it, but don't let it stay for very long. You got to move on. Don't hold on to them. You got to kind of push past it. I guess opinions are a bit like ideas. Just because you've got an opinion doesn't mean that it couldn't be changed. And actually, I really like and quite enjoy having my opinions changed. It feels like I don't know, improving as a person. And I guess the people that have kind of got higher levels of status, I think, as you move up through an organization and maybe you start getting, more fancy titles and stuff like that, I think is helpful to stay humble and to stay kind of grounded, that because you're called an assistant principal or even the CEO or something like that doesn't add any additional weight necessarily to your ideas or your opinions. And then the last one I thought about was successes as well, kind of the opposite to failures, I suppose. Not to believe our own hype. Even if you have been very successful and you continue to be successful, there's no guarantee that that's going to continue. And so whatever's made you successful, effort, planning, collaboration, hold on to those things because that's probably what's helped rather than you as an individual. And then there's a blurb on the slide for people that are watching this on the video, but it effectively says kind of leaders need to seek out learning in all situations, have a kind of mindset that almost accepts discomfort and looks for discomfort because that's where the kind of learning is, to value diversity in teams, both in kind of demographics, but for me, more importantly, sort of people's opinions and perspectives and their expertise. Um, this idea that in terms of control, the more we can, I guess, delegate, the more we develop others, the more we become less, not required, but yeah, less kind of pivotal. And then ultimately, the end bit being that idea of kind of when we're presenting stuff to other people, we shouldn't present it as the final like message or the final product. I've certainly learned that in my role, kind of trust wide, that even if I've spent ages working on something and I think it's my best work, I have to present it with a little bit of room left for people to contribute because they need to see themselves in these products for them to really engage. And I think it comes across quite well when I regularly now almost call everything a draft and put version one, version two, version three on these things to almost really explicitly translate or communicate this idea that there's still room. I'm holding these lightly and there's still room for you to kind of contribute. So that was what I was thinking when I sort of did that. But why did it resonate with you, Kat?
It really resonated with me because I do actually see that I change my mind a lot as a strength. And I
Right.
think there was a time when leaders felt that once they'd kind of voiced their opinion on something, that they had to stand by it, because if they didn't, that would be perceived as a weakness. But actually,
Yeah.
no. When new information comes to light, or I have my perspective changed, I will change my mind, because why
Yeah.
wouldn't I? That is a strength, and that is an ever adapting kind of leader. And I think it's quite easy to otherwise kind of get stuck on a hill of your kind of beliefs and whatever your ideas are, and not actually move from that while things are changing around you so quickly. And I think we know, how much we've evolved in the teaching profession, our understanding of leadership and teaching over the last few years. If we all kept our ideas from 20 years ago, we would be in a really problematic place, wouldn't we? So I think we have to
Yeah.
accept that whatever our ideas are now, that in 20 years time, yet again, they're
Yeah.
going to be very different, and hopefully better, and therefore we need to kind of really be ready for that. And I think it kind of links into what you said about kind of learning and forever learning. I think when you start your career, almost everyone around you is more expert than you, and
Yeah.
therefore you have that great opportunity to learn from all those people, and you see it as learning from people with more expertise. But as you become more expertise in maybe your subject, your domain, leadership, whatever that is, there are less people who perceivably have more expertise than you, and that doesn't mean that you can't learn from everyone. Like, we've got to really flip the kind of script on that, and we've got to think, actually everyone can pick up ideas, expertise from all of the people working in that domain, whether they are perceived to be more expert or not. Because we'll all know that you've observed that trainee or that ECT teaching your lesson and been like, wow, like I'm stealing that idea, or that's a different perspective. And I think when we're working in teams, we have to be really careful to make sure that we're not always just opening debate out to those people who've got perceived expertise. Sometimes a completely different perspective or an idea can kind of bring things to light or spark thinking for
Yeah.
everyone. That's really important. And I think really making sure that we actively listen, and that we gain different perspectives, and that we seek those out. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I do regularly as my role is to kind of decide that we need to move on something, and then and get people in a room with a very loose agenda about why we're together, and then hold a discussion that allows everyone to get those ideas out and begin to formulate a plan. It can be really messy. What I'd kind of liken it to is, if you're going to clean your kitchen and you've got to get everything out of the cupboards and it's all over the floor first before you then organize it and kind of put it away. There's a point
Oh,
where all of the tins are all over the floor, and it is way more complex than when you started, and you're like, oh, why did we start this? Because it's so complex. But
yeah.
you can draw that then back together and end up with something better than any one person would have come up with on their own. And it's something that we kind of we really actively kind of promote that approach to kind of problem solving.
Oh my God. Wow. You've really stretched my sort of working memory here, trying to hold on to all the good stuff. I'm like, I want to talk
Sorry.
about that. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I've gone over my like 5 to 8 pieces of information here, so bear with me while I drag this up. But the first one I thought that you mentioned then, which I loved, is that the power in a leader admitting they were wrong or they've changed their mind is unbelievable for someone who's, again, younger in their career or whatever, to see that being made okay by someone that you hold in high esteem opens the door for you then to say, I think I got that wrong, or I've changed my mind. I think it's so important that leaders model that as much as they can. You don't want to make yourself lose credibility, but there's definitely something in that door is potentially closed until you as a leader open it by demonstrating that you're fallible as well. And yeah, as I said, it's let me down in my working memory. But there was something in there I was thinking about. This idea of expertise, that a lot of times our expertise is developed through formal training, or
Mm,
um, from gaining information that's been published somewhere, books, blogs, whatever it's going to be. But you've got this idea, of this tacit knowledge. So that knowledge that is kind of not written or published anywhere is just held by people that have gained it through lots of experience. And for me, that's fascinating. That if you don't keep looking and keep speaking to people and recognize that formal qualifications or formal expertise may not be where all of the knowledge sits, you might be missing out on all kinds of useful things. Um, I mean, the flippant one is, things like, I don't know, how to get the photocopier to work, isn't it? Or how to do this or how to do that. The things that you just don't know. Um, so there's something there. And then the last one, which I am going to be dining out on all week, is that idea of the clearing out the cupboard, because that's great. And I didn't want to interrupt, but that thing where you find the old can of beans from like 2 years ago.
Mm.
I mean, probably when you start unpacking things, you're going to find stuff that you just don't need anymore. That
Mm.
aren't useful, aren't productive. Oh yeah, that's great. I'm going to definitely make a launch pad out of that.
Mm. I think
Okay.
there is a
Well,
peak point to build from it though, which is this idea that we do need to actually make decisions though at times, like, and we do need to
yeah,
make them and stand by them. And I think what it's really important to do is kind of just be reassured that you're making the decision based on the best information for now,
yeah,
and trust your future self to do the same thing when you get there, even if that's different from now. And I think there's something quite empowering to know that actually this might not be the decision that I would have made if I was making this in 4 months' time, but this
yeah,
is the information that I've got, and then this is what I'm going to do with it.
yeah. Amazing. Well, sadly, we come to the last part of the podcast, but I'm excited about this one, strangely. So this is the final kind of fast friends question that Kat's chosen, and it's called "What embarrassing moment in your life comes quickest to mind?" So let's
Mm.
finish on a high.
Okay, well, I promise I will give you one, but I'm going to do like a little bit of like a preamble kind of
Okay, go
first,
on.
because I really, really, really struggled to choose from that last set of questions. And when I got to this question, I was like, I can't think of a single embarrassing moment. Like, there must be loads. Like, I'm always doing stuff. I was like
Yeah,
thinking, have
doing
I
stupid things.
have I blocked them out, or like, am I in denial? And then I realised that actually it's not. It's because when they happen, I just go around telling everyone and laughing about it. And then
Yeah,
it's not embarrassing anymore. And the second that you
love it.
sort of own these things and
Yeah,
literally start telling them as kind of jokes about what silly thing that you've done, whatever that is, all of a sudden they lose their power over you.
love that.
Um, so I was like really thinking, what is the one thing? And I thought of one thing that I still find embarrassing when I think about it. And when I just before I started this post, there was a sort of trust-wide PD day running, and it was kind of a mostly kind of online sort of scheduled event. And I'd done some of the training, like I'd kind of done some contributions and some other bits, and it was sort of in the midst of the time when it was sort of the real social media boom, and it was all kind of about getting all the staff to kind of get involved with social media. So I'd sort of
Yeah,
finished this one session that I'd ran, and I was sort of sitting in my office, and then I sort of joined the next session. People from all over the trust are kind of watching these sessions and kind of getting involved, and might be sitting in teams in their schools watching these on
yeah,
massive screens, that kind of stuff. And I was like, right, okay, I've done my session. I'm going to quickly retweet those things and repost those things. So I just sort of turned on the next session. I sat there for a few minutes, quickly on my phone, retweeting this trust stuff and going, yeah, okay, like passing it on. And then I got a
yeah.
text message through from my friend who worked in the same school as me, who's one of the science teachers, who said, are you having a good time on your phone there, Kat? And I looked up and I realised that I'd got my camera on. Not many of the people in this meeting had got their camera on, and I was just mortified. I was like, I might have been like on, and because I was taking this post as well, so I was moving into a trust wide post. It became like this big thing in my head. I was like, oh my goodness, like all of these people that I don't know will have just seen me sitting there on their phone and just thought that I was like, I don't know what I would be doing, but this was
Got on
work
Facebook.
related.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think the reason it still really niggles me is I couldn't go round and tell everyone and laugh
yeah,
about it because I didn't know who had seen it. And I think, maybe I'm sneakily sharing it on this podcast to sort
yeah.
of diffuse that one for me now so that I can move on from that one so that we can laugh about it and then we can kind of move on. But I think because I couldn't diffuse it, because I didn't know who'd seen me sitting there looking like I was just playing on my phone while someone was kind of doing this piece of CPD, yeah, I was really mortified by that.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, again, we don't usually get takeaways from the kind of fast friends questions, but the one that sticks with me there was that phrase you used around once you admit it, it loses its power. And I think that's true for mistakes as well, isn't it? And I guess the takeaway is, if you if you're a leader or an emerging leader or whatever, and you've made a mistake, then yeah, find someone who you feel psychologically safe with, and get it out, and then make it lose its power. Because if you hold on to it, it'll just grow and grow. And yeah, brilliant. Wow, thanks ever so much for coming. It was even better than I anticipated. So thanks. What are you up to at the moment? You got any big projects on? You still blogging?
I'm not still blogging at the moment, although I've kind of got the list of things that I kind of want to blog about.
Yeah.
But I think actually kind of my job at the moment is really keeping me busy with some of our really big priorities kind of
Yeah.
across the trust. So yeah, my big priority at the moment is kind of our pedagogical principles and the rollout of that.
Nice.
So yeah.
Okay. But I guess people can contact you if they're interested in any of the stuff they've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're on LinkedIn and Whistle Blue Sky, and I'll put all the links in the chat. If
Yeah.
you're interested in any of the leadership launchpad stuff, of course, get in contact with me. There's a website now, and kind of we're offering some additional sort of CPD and resources and all that kind of cool stuff. So, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll see you at the next one.